We were living on Fayetteville, on Barbary Road, which is off of Fayetteville, and that's 3.5 miles south. My father and his brother bought a farm, and it was a house already on it. Pettigrew Street, we had two movie theaters, had one hotel, and then we had the Durham Armory. We had a lot of development facilities in the area. John Day Boys Club was built by brick donation. Built a gym and tennis courts, and then we had tobacco factories. A lot of the people were able to buy homes and all that had just high school education or something less. They were able to own homes. I saw someone just running a hot dog stand and buying a new Cadillac. We've lost a lot of ground, and as much as some of our younger people were being educated, they were being educated and dispersing everywhere. I'm encouraged every time I see them conquering new areas and expanding business, just having vision and this kind of thing, because without a vision, the people do perish.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Henry McKoy. Well, thank you all for coming out today. First of all, I'd like to thank Providence 1898 for allowing us to have this beautiful spot in the historic No Climb Mutual Insurance building. I'd like to thank our team, staff for coming out today to be a part of this wonderful program. We're standing here today at this historic moment, Juneteenth, 100 years after the Tulsa Race Massacre. In 1921, after Tulsa went up in flames, Durham, North Carolina was the lone remaining Black Wall Street in the United States. So we're here today to talk about that. I'd like to talk to you for a moment about a wonderful project that we're leading, Hayti Reborn. But first, we'd like to hear from one of our wonderful, lifelong Hayti residents, Anita Scott Neville.
My father was ultimately a Black businessman on Pettigrew Street. And my father, along with other Black businessmen, could walk into Mechanics and Farmers Bank and ask to see Mr. Wheeler, John Wheeler, who was the president. He could walk in and talk about some economic challenges and walk out with a check. That's how the community supported one another, and that was vital in Pettigrew Street and Hayti being able to survive. There was a spirit of community and not competition, because everybody helped each other to do and provide and get what they all needed to carry on. With the strength of the vision coming to fruition, can others survive?
So what was Hayti? For those of you who don't know, Hayti was named after the French colony, Haiti, the first independent country created by former slaves. Hayti took that mantra and moved forward. At its height, Hayti was unique. It was an ecosystem. W.B. Du Bois came here in the early 1900s and talked about its marvel, where a man could lay on a bed, go to a store, buy goods, work for someone, was also African-American. And so for us, Hayti is an incredible legacy that we want to bring back. So what does that look like? Well, in order to create an ecosystem, you need anchor institutions. In the 1900s, that anchor institution was tobacco. It was a global marketplace because there were not enough white people to actually work in the factory. They had to also bring in African Americans. Those African Americans came in, they took the jobs, a lot of times some of the worst jobs, but they then took that capital, came back to their community, created entrepreneurship, created businesses, and they circulated around the community. So that ecosystem created things like No Climb Mutual Insurance, the building that we're standing in today. It created institutions like McKoy and Farmers, one of the oldest Black banks in the United States. It created No Climb Central University, the first publicly supported historically Black college around in the United States. And so on that legacy, we stand here today. So let's talk about a community economic ecosystem. Again, I talked to you about what Hayti was and how incredible it was, and how it was a marvel of the United States. It was known as the capital of the black middle class. It was known as the city on the hill for African Americans. It actually was a place where, at the time when African Americans was trying to leave the South, Hayti was a place that African Americans came to. And at one time, it had more African American millionaires per capita than any place in the United States. So what happened? Well, in the mid-60s, the highway happened, like it did many other places. Every black Wall Street wasn't destroyed like Tulsa was, or like Wilmington was in 1898. Some of that came later. Highway systems came right through the middle of black communities, and Hayti was one of those black communities. It destroyed hundreds of houses, hundreds of businesses that were never rebuilt. But in order to understand really what it did, what it destroyed, we had to look a little bit closer. It destroyed individuals, it destroyed families, homes, firms, organizations, and most of all, institutions, which are the backbone of communities. So let's hear from Joyce Spate, someone who has a legacy of entrepreneurship in this community.
I come from a family of entrepreneurs. My grandfather helped build and finance, to some degree, a lot of the businesses in Black Wall Street. We are one of the last that still own and operate from that era, from Hayti and Black Wall Street era. And that passed to my father, and from my father, to his children. And so we're trying to preserve that legacy now. While each one of us have our own set of businesses, some of us multiple, we're still trying to continue that legacy of entrepreneurship and ownership while supporting our community. Durham needs resources. Durham needs resources, and Durham needs the people of Durham, because I think there's two totally different things. There's Durham, and then there's the people of Durham, and the people of Durham need equity, and they need to be made whole and healed from all of the atrocities from the past. And the baseline is equity, period. If it's not equal, it's not inclusive, and it's not diverse.
So to understand where Durham is now and where it might go, we have to understand where it's been. So what is the evolution of Durham? So first of all, like many other communities, after the Civil War, Durham rose up and it segregated. For all practical purposes, the last battle of the Civil War happened here in Durham. Durham has an enormous Black population. At the end of slavery, the Black and white populations divided. On this particular slide, you'll see a line in between the white downtown Durham and the Black Hayti. That was a railroad track, which for many places was that dividing line. So from 1865 to about 1960, roughly 100 years, we saw that stark segregation here in Durham. However, very differently than other places, Durham Blacks and whites actually did intermingle a bit. And so you had, though you had largely built up the Hayti community around entrepreneurship, that those Black entrepreneurs did have white customers. On the other side of that, you also had some Black institutions that were in white Durham. And so unlike some places that really were just stark by that railroad track, you really did have some intermingling between Black and white Durham for about 100 years. But then what I call stage two happened around the mid-1960s, and a number of factors contributed to what we now know to be the demise of the community. First of all, when the highway system came through the middle of Hayti, it destroyed, again, hundreds of houses, hundreds of businesses. And that really created a downward spiral for the community. At the same time, we had social integration that we know of to be the 1960s, the civil rights movement. Well, many people thought that the civil rights movement and social integration would be two-way, right? That Blacks and whites would both intermingle. But largely what happened was economic integration went one way. The Black dollar went into the white community. Here in Hayti, what happened was many of the whites got upset because the Blacks were asking for things like voting rights, asking for more freedoms. And so they stopped actually patronizing those Black businesses. And so over this time period, you really saw an incredible decline of the Black Durham. Then, probably around 1985, for the next 20 years, what we saw was the impact of globalization. Now, globalization itself actually had a total, incredible impact on all of Durham. Tobacco production went overseas, largely in China. And so what you saw is decline of institutions, not only Black institutions, but white institutions. And we started seeing also the entering of our Hispanic brothers and sisters to the community. And so for those 20 years was really, really a challenge for Durham. So what happened? This redevelopment that we saw that happened over the course of about the last 15 years, from 2005 to 2020. That growth, that redevelopment really happened on the back of Duke University's rise to become this prominent university across the world. You also saw the Research Triangle Park rise and become this innovation hub and become part of those few cities that you hear about, Silicon Valley, the Boston corridor, Austin. And so Durham has become that kind of place. However, unlike the first time when Durham rose economically on the back of tobacco, this time the Black community was left out. They were not pulled into this innovation economy. They were not pulled into this rise. And so what we've seen is an incredible growth of institutions, white institutions in Durham. At the same time, we've seen an incredible decrease of Black institutions. And so what we see today is really an outgrowth of tremendous amounts of investments into that white infrastructure and the lack of investment into the Black infrastructure. So what does that mean? Where are we going? Right now, about 20 people a day move to Durham. Most of those people are white. Most of them are college educated. Most of them are part of the creative class. And so what we're seeing now is a tremendous amount of gentrification. We're seeing neighborhood gentrification, so residential folks are being pushed out. We see commercial gentrification. The downtown looks very different than it did once. And so if we don't do something, then Durham has a very real possibility of looking like this in the future. So what is that current situation? So Durham racial shares. So the way you understand this slide is look on the left-hand side. So if you look at the demographics of who makes up Durham, about 40% of the population is white, about 38% is African-American, about 13% is Hispanic. And so Durham is a community that doesn't have a majority population. However, certainly whites are becoming an increasing amount of that overall population. So if you think about this like a bank account. If Durham was broken up into 100 people, 40 of those people would be white, and those 40 white people would have about $92 of the $100 in their bank account. The 38 Black people would have to share $2.50 in their bank account. The 13 Hispanics will have to share $2 in their bank account. So think about that. What we see today is an outgrowth of disinvestment over time. If you look at Durham and who's in poverty, about half of the people that are in poverty in Durham are African American. Another 20% are Hispanic, Latino. That means that 3/4 of the people in Durham who are in poverty are Black or brown. And many of those individuals have families. They have kids that are coming up through the school systems. Those kids are coming up in low-income homes, in poverty homes, and we're seeing multiple generations of poverty reinvent itself. So we must do something. You look at Hayti, the Hayti community, again, wants to marvel the world, wants the more African-American millionaires per capita than any place in the United States, wants a place that had stately homes for the leaders of the community. It's now the poorest community in Durham. Durham's economics have continued to increase over time. We have one of the highest per capita incomes across North Carolina and across the United States. But at the same time, the Durham Black community, the Hayti community, has continued to see a decline. Look at what I call Hayti 1, which is right around the Durham Freeway. Hayti 1 is about 96% African American. However, that group has only about 16% per capita annual income. $16,000 a year, that's barely $1,000 a month. Hayti 2, which is what we call Northeast Central Durham, that population is actually becoming more gentrified, so it's now down to about 76% African American. However, that median income is right around $21,000 a year. Look at Hayti 3, which is in areas we think about like McDougal Terrace and public housing projects. That area is about 82% African American, and that median income is only $17,000 a year. And so we see really in stark contrast to the rest of Durham, which is close to $60,000 a year per capita income. And then right in that middle spot is North Carolina State University, a historic university, the oldest publicly supported HBCU in the United States. We educate some of the most challenging students from an economic standpoint. Our students that come to NCCU are among some of the lowest income families in the United States. And so all those together create what we have today, which is continued decline of that overall ecosystem that once was a marvel of the United States. So let's hear from Latasha Betts-Gaddy, one of our entrepreneurs here in Durham.
Engaging the community is so important for this project because they are the ones that are rooted and living in the community. So we want them to share what they see as their vision for the community. We want them to share what they would like to see as part of this vision. You know, from an economic perspective, we want Black wealth to continue in this community. And as we have seen historically, the gap has definitely continued to increase. And we feel like this is an important way to close the wealth gap. And this is a way to really recycle those Black dollars within our community. And I know that we're not going to be able to stop gentrification, but we can also be a part of it from really having Black businesses, Black landowners to also be able to invest in their community.
So what do you do? What do you do when you look around and see the lowest income people suffering? You see their community continue to decline as the rest of Durham grows, as it expands. I think what you do is you have to talk to people. You have to have deep conversations. You have to ask them, what do you need? What do you want? For the last 5 years, I spent an incredible amount of time. I have to have the privilege of working at North Carolina Central University, which is in the heart of Hayti. I've had a chance to sit down and talk with some of our distinguished residents of the Hayti community, residents, seniors, churches, businesses, and youth, and have that deep conversation. So what does I find? So what does this community want? Well, it wants many of the things that all of us want, right? It wants increased safety. It wants increased quality, affordable housing. It wants workforce housing as well as low-income housing. It also wants increased community success. The people in the community want success for themselves, it wants success for their children, and it wants success for their neighbors. It also wants an increased civic voice, meaning that it wants the government to listen to them. It wants the government to pay attention to what they want, to what they need. It wants increased equity, meaning investment. It wants public and private investment to come into the community and create nearby amenities. They don't want to have to get on buses and go all the way across town just to get fresh food. They don't want to look around and see barren, open landscapes with nothing on them. They want things, they want investment. They want increased financial mobility. They're seeing other folks' income rise as theirs declining. They're losing buying power. They want to be a part of the American dream like anybody else. They want quality jobs. They want living wage jobs. And they want opportunities to advance, not just get pulled into jobs that they never move upward from. They want geographic agency. I think it's important that people make a decision about where they want to be. If they want to be in a place, they should be able to stay there. If they want to move, they should be able to move. That's geographic agency. And then finally, they want a successful Durham. I mean, that's what they want. They love Durham. Durham is their home. They want Durham to be successful, but they also want to be a part of that future as well. So let me bring this into closure and think about this context. And I want you to think about this very clearly. If you think about the history over the last 100 years, we talked about what happened 100 years ago in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And at that moment, Durham became the de facto Black Wall Street in the United States. If we look at Durham 100 years ago, Blacks owned movie theaters, retail shops, mills, schools, hospitals, everything that you could need in the community. 100 years ago. Fast forward to now, most of those are gone. So how do you go backwards in such a way over the last decade as we've increased technology, we've conquered the world, all these kind of things, yet this community has lost so much. And so what's so important about this is to understand that that you have to be intentional about moving forward. So what does the future look like? Let's hear from one of our young stars, Zakiya Smith.
It's important for young people to get engaged early on around equity because they need to have a sense of who they are. It's important for them to understand their history, because without a sense of history, you really know how far you can go in the future. So I think it's very important for students, for children, for parents to teach their younger kids to stay involved, to get involved, so that way they can have a greater outcome in the future. My greatest hope for the future is that there will be more people who look like me in this seat. There will be more people at the tables, on the Zoom calls, that can have these conversations, that'll get these conversations started about racial equity and what it can do for the world.
So isn't that what it's about, the future? Zakiya, youth, young people, that's what we're here talking about. That's what Hayti once did. It created a future of individuals that saw themselves as incredible parts of the economy. I would talk to people from the Hayti community who are now in their 70s and 80s and say, you know, tell me about Hayti, and they would marvel at what it was, and they would tell me that they grew up thinking they could be anything they wanted in the world. I said, well, how did you come up with that? Why did you think that? They said, because that's what I saw around me. I saw people doing everything. And so that's the spirit that we're looking at right now. So what is the next phase of growth for Durham? So what we do know is that over the last several decades, we've seen an incredible amount of investment in other parts of Durham. So downtown has seen billions of dollars invested, and it's still growing. What we call New Hope Commons area, going toward Chapel Hill, has grown tremendously. Highway 54, 55, where we have that intersection, just gone gangbusters. North Point area, South Point area, South Side residential. We've seen investment in every place in Durham except the Fayetteville Street Quarter and Northeast Central Durham, what we know to be Hayti. But guess what? We've seen this strategy before. You have a community that you don't invest in, the economics of that community shrinks. As people come in, you buy land cheap, people get pushed out, and it becomes a gentrified community. So then what do we want? What kind of development do we want? Well, first of all, let's talk about the different kinds of development. So you may have what you call level zero development. Level zero development is essentially what we, that's kind of the black standard model, right? Nobody invests in the community. It stays as it is, and it just declines over time. Level one is what I call kind of market-driven development. That's what we know to be gentrification. That means people come in, they push the folks that were there before out, and they replace them. Level two is something a little bit different. Level two is that development that is a bit smaller, not as ambitious. What I call small dreams development, right? It says, okay, well, we'll put something in your community, but it won't be that ambitious. You should be happy with what you get. But then there's level three. And level three is actually what this is about, what Hayti Reborn is about. Level three is about shared economic prosperity. It's about ownership by the community. It's about redevelopment of these properties by the people in those communities. And as they rise, those people's incomes and livelihood rise as well. So the Hayti Reborn mission and vision is really to bring level three development to the Fayetteville Street Quarter and the Hayti communities in a way that benefits the community and Durham, because Durham will benefit if we lift up everybody, and catalyzes positive impact in the nearby and associated areas to Hayti. We will achieve widely shared prosperity, and we will do so while actually honoring the unique cultural legacy of past generations and leaders and strengthening future ones. So we have to have an alternate mindset to do that. First of all, we have to really begin with this idea of finding the solution absent of what it's going to cost. What is the real solution to this problem, right? How do we get to the roots of the problem and not just worry about the symptoms of the problem? We have to start out with the idea of a blank slate. If you start out with a $10 budget, you're going to come up with a $10 solution. So we have to go beyond that. And we have to throw all our assets into this mission. We got to be totally in, all our brain power. And guess what? Those people in these communities bring a great amount of that brain power. What we see sometimes as liabilities are actually assets. And we have to use those assets to move this community forward. So what are the three components of success? Well, we have to bring together the public sector, the private sector, the philanthropic sector, all together, and we have to be willing to be re-educated. Re-educated because we all came up in this system that really is drenched in systematic racism. And we have certain things that we think about population, but we have to get rid of that. We have to re-educate ourselves. But we also need 3 other things in this endeavor. We need bold and visionary leadership. We need innovative partnerships, and we need reparative justice. So the bold and visionary leadership, we must look at the situation through new eyes. We must really rethink this whole, all this work that we're doing. We have to see minority and the minority communities as part of the solution, not the problem. When it comes to innovative partnerships, we got to bring together public, private philanthropic partnerships together and bring new approaches to the table. Things that we've never dreamed of before, that we've never tried before. We have to bring those to bear on this problem. We have to really be intentional about those partnerships and who's at the table. Diversity, inclusion, and equity are not the same thing. So we got to make sure that what we do is equitable. Reparative justice. We have to really look at what we might think of as systematic reparations, right? The systems that we have currently are reproducing these inequities. We have to look at how do we go in and change that. We have to create reparative justice for past generations, current generations, and future generations. And that means bringing capital to bear and opportunity. So what does that look like? Well, guess what? It's simple, but it's not an easy model. It's what I call equity by design, a total portfolio strategy. So why equity by design? Well, because the system that we have now was inequitable by design. It was created to do exactly what it's doing now. In order to change that, we have to create a system that was made for equity. And that means looking at all the assets we have in the community. How do we use land? How do we use capital? How do we build homes? How do we build businesses? How do we invest in our future generations? How do we do all that? And it can't just be for a moment in time. It's going to take multi-decades of investment, of real investment, of intentional investment. And think about this. We have to create a place where equity matters and it always moves forward. And guess what? Placemaking is not about the place, it's about the people. We always have to keep that at the center of this work. So what do we have to do to rebuild this community economic ecosystem that was once the marvel of the Black community? We have to create a community economic ecosystem driven by 3 activities. One is what I call directional upbuilding. You have to have concept and context for what you're doing. You have to understand the world that we live in today, and how do we make sure that we connect that world to all the opportunities that are out there. We have to also have institutional upbuilding. What made Hayti so unique is that it had institutions, and institutions that anchored the community. That's our core. Those institutions put people to work. They fed families. They gave apprenticeships and internships to young people. They invested in philanthropic, community, social items. They did all of that. We need that once again. And then finally, we need this to be sustainable. We have to create sustainable upbuilding, not just a moment in time, but sustainable over time. And that means we have to build a confidence of the community, and we have to build a capital of the community. Those things have to come together. And when those things come together, you will have a strong and robust ecosystem. So let's wrap up this conversation about Hayti Reborn. So what is Hayti Reborn? So it's creating a community-led and benefited community economic ecosystem. That means that the community is first. We're bringing together the public sector, the private sector, the philanthropic sector, the academic sector. But guess what? At the heart of that is the community. It's always about the community. We must all come together around that. You know how we're going to start? We're going to start by bringing together the elders of the community, those who have so much wisdom and knowledge and have been a part of this community and still have that spirit of Hayti within them. We're going to build this foundation on top of them, and then we're going to grow from that. We're going to create upward mobility and improve people's lives without having to move them out, without having to displace them. Create safer places to work, to live, and to play. And we're going to become the model for the rest of the world and across the United States. That's what Hayti Reborn is about. So in conclusion, Durham can be a teaching city. It can be the marvel of the world once again. We got to bring together city and county partners. We have to leverage current investments to create prosperity, shared economic prosperity. We have to understand the core of this is going to be the inclusion of minority businesses as a part of this, particularly African-American businesses, building on that unique history that we have here. And we have to look at how do we build this overall ecosystem without displacing people. And so I mentioned partners. We always need great and wonderful partners. I want to invite up here right now Mr. Nick Allen, who is the Chief Program Officer for the United Way Greater Triangle. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Dr. McKoy. Good afternoon. Every neighborhood has a history. Stories of dreams and challenges, stories of strength and resilience in the face of injustice, an origin story, and a story of rebirth. These stories are held and carried forward by the people most connected to the place. It is through this history, these stories, and most importantly, the people, that we find purpose in our steps today and a collective vision for the future. Rooted in these firm beliefs, United Way of the Greater Triangle is proud to partner with the Hayti community and Dr. Henry McKoy to see that Hayti is reborn in a way that centers justice, focuses on wealth creation, and eradicates both the symptoms and the root causes of racialized disinvestment. For 133 years, United Ways across the country have served the local communities through a charity model, direct response to immediate need. Yet the problems have persisted. The United Way of the Greater Triangle, your United Way, is committed to building a model that balances charity and an orientation to justice. A strategy that will build the abilities of local neighborhoods like Hayti to own their stories, to define the work that needs to be done, and decide how we get to success. We call this approach neighborhood impact. Led by Angel Brown, the United Way will leverage its resources and networks to support building the autonomous power within communities. The power to define and the power to decide. A power not connected to anything but their own history, stories, and dreams. The Hayti community has an abundance of assets, but perhaps none more valuable than its elders. Long-term residents with the wisdom and the hope that will lead a rebirth of a proud community. A perspective and a reality that Hayti was once an economic hub of the region and that the community has the ability to be that again. With the elders at the center, our first steps are to bring a group of community members together with the purpose of building the relationships needed and the confidence in the idea that together, united, we can achieve the wildest of dreams. Hayti Reborn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick, for that. We've seen the rise of Hayti. We've seen the decline of Hayti. Now let's see Hayti Reborn. I want to thank you all for coming out today and being a part of this. Now I want to open up the floor for questions. Okay. We good? I think we good? Well, thank you all for this time, and we look forward to working with you. We need your help. We need your assistance. Let's join forces and rebirth Hayti. Thank you.